Oh.
Yeah, and the other one's to cut off.
Good morning, everyone. I think we'll get underway. It is a beautiful morning. We'll do some city planning. Before we get underway, I would like just to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on the unceded and never surrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence ont enrichi et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. I'll ask the committee coordinator to do a roll call, please.
Councillor Lowe,
Councillor Lowe is going to be a little bit late.
Councillor Tierney,
Here.
Councillor Troster,
Here.
Vice Chair Gower,
Here.
and Chair Leaper.
I'm here.
Quorum.
So this is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 4.1, 5.1 to 5.4 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
I think, Councillor Kavanaugh, you're having some technical issues, I think, on your end. You might want to try turning your video off just to give you a little extra bandwidth there. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on February 8th, 2023, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. Declarations of interest. I understand Councillor Johnson has a declaration to make.
I, Councillor Lane Johnson, declare a potential deemed indirect pecuniary interest on the following items on the Planning and Housing Committee agenda of January 31st, 2023. Item 4.1, zoning bylaw amendment 535 Chapel Street, as my spouse has a financial relationship with the owner of the property.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. At the appropriate time in the agenda, we'll ask you to leave the room. Confirmation of minutes, the Planning and Housing Committee minutes 1 Wednesday, January 18th, 2023. Are those minutes confirmed? Thank you. So the agenda today, postponements and deferral. We are going to deal today with the zoning bylaw amendment for 535 Chapel Street. We have a presentation. There are delegations to it, and there's a correspondence. So we'll hold that item. The zoning bylaw amendment for 1525 and 1533 Goth Avenue. We have delegations to that item, so, as well as technical motions. So we are going to hold it. For the zoning bylaw amendment at 4829 Abbott Street East, that one is to add an office use to the site-specific exception for up to 3 years as detailed in document 2. Is that item carried? Carried. Thank you. For the item at 5100 Kanata Avenue, that is to add an exception permitting animal care establishment as an additional permitted use as detailed in document 2. Is that item carried?
Carried.
Thank you.
Carried.
At 4149 Strandherd Drive, we don't have any presentation, delegations, or correspondence. That is to an improvement amendment to the zoning bylaw for part of the property as shown in document 1 to permit an automobile dealership as outlined in document 2. Is that item carried? Carried. Oh, I'm sorry. I should just ask, the applicants are available to speak to the item. Adam Thompson, Murray Chown, Jeff Pablo, David Johnson, Cyril Leader. Gentlemen, if the committee is prepared to carry it, and clearly they are, did you need to speak to that item?
Hello, Chair Leaper, Adam Thompson with Novatech. No, that would be fine if that item goes by consent. We don't need to add anything.
Thank you very much. My apologies for rushing through that.
Yeah,
And then on
works.
the new zoning bylaw revised work plan timelines, we do have a presentation, so we will hold that item. So coming back to the agenda then from the top, the first item is with respect to 535 Chapel Street. Councillor Johnson has declared a conflict, so we'll just allow her to leave the room. And then there is a technical motion from Councillor that Councillor Gower will move, and I'll ask Councillor Gower to put that on the table now.
Okay, so this is a technical motion, whereas the report seeks approval of an additional story to an existing 2.5-story building to add 5 additional residential units. And whereas a technical amendment is required to correct 2 errors in document 2 of the report. Therefore, be it resolved that with respect to the report, amend document 2 by substituting in section 2B3 the word rear with interior side, and substituting clause D with clause H immediately following section 161.15. And be it further resolved that pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act, no further notice be given.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gower. We'll deal with that amendment after we've heard from delegations. So to start us off then, I believe Jean-Charles Renaud is going to take us through a presentation.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. The zoning amendment for today is at 535 Chapel Street. Just a brief overview of the location. It's located on the east side of Chapel Street between Mann Avenue and Templeton Street in the Sandy Hill neighborhood. The property is currently occupied by a 2.5-story apartment dwelling with 4 units. The surrounding area is generally characterized by residential units ranging from singles to low-rise. Commercial plaza is located to the south. A planned unit development with residential units ranging from townhouse to high-rise is located further south. And it's also located within close proximity to both Campus and Lee's LRT stations. The current zoning is R4 UB with exception 480. Exception 480 simply allows dwelling units as a permitted use. The R4 UB zone allows low-rise apartment dwellings up to 12 units. And also allows heights up to 11 meters for low-rise apartment dwellings. Just this is the proposed site plan. So you see the footprint of the building on the right with a shared laneway or private laneway in the middle of the 2 unit or the 2 properties, this one and the neighboring one. And there are bicycle parking spaces proposed for the rear, as well as a garbage storage building and amenity area, which is to be landscaped. So, proposed rendering. So you see on the left, the current building, and on the right, demonstration of the additional story proposed, along with a vertical element at the front of the building. Proposed zoning, R4 UB with a site-specific exception. The site-specific exception would allow a minimum lot area of 232 square meters, a minimum lot width of 7.6 meters, minimum side yard setback of 0 meters on one side and 0.8 meters on the other, and a minimum rear yard setback of 6.5 meters. And it's important to note that those required zoning relief is simply a recognition of the existing site context and the placement of the building as it exists today. The last proposed zoning relief is from section 161.15H, which requires 20% of the front facade to be recessed 0.6 meters from the front line setback. While the situation is made better by the changes proposed to the building, it still requires reduction or relief from this provision. And just a quick overview, the proposal is consistent with visual plan policies. It's consistent with the Sandy Hill secondary plan policies, and it supports the intent of the zoning bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Renaud. We'll hold questions for staff until after we've heard from delegations. I think we have the applicants with us. Lisa and team, are you here?
Yeah, we are. Tyler will be taking the presentation, and I believe he's emailed it to the counselor coordinator chair.
Fantastic. You have 5 minutes to make a presentation to committee.
Morning. Are the slides up? I don't see them on Zoom.
Sorry, the slides are coming.
Okay.
There we go. Sorry for the delay. Please proceed.
Oh, no worries at all. Okay, good morning. My name is Tyler Yakachuk. I'm a planner with Photon Planning and Design, making the presentation on behalf of Smart Living Properties. We will quickly review the existing property in context, the proposed development, requested relief, and if necessary, review the supporting policy. Next slide, please. JC's covered this, but we'll quickly go over it again. The subject property is located in the Sandy Hill neighborhood within 600-meter radius of the Lease LRT station. As seen on the image below, the site map, the property abuts parking lot to the south and a shared pathway with the abutting property to the north. As well, please note that the abutting property to the north is also owned by Smart Living Properties. As well, you'll note the image for 525 Chapel is a similarly sized development already present in the area. Next slide, please. The proposed redevelopment of the existing 2.5-story apartment building, which includes 4 units presently, looks to add an additional floor to the building, remove the balcony directly above the primary entrance, and add a facade to create a greater articulation on the front of the building. Next slide, please. The proposed development will improve the number of residential units to 7 bachelor units and 2 4-bedroom units. Regarding the exterior of the site, the redevelopment will include a new tree planting at the front of the property, 11 bicycle parking spaces, and a purpose-built garage storage structure at the rear. The development will also improve the shared area to the north of the property by creating a shared pathway to improve access to the rear of the building, and a bicycle storage structure for the neighboring property, again, which is also owned by Smart Living. Next slide, please. On these elevation drawings, you can see the additional and complementary material choices used on the fourth floor, as well additional features on the front facade of the building add greater articulation to the building and clearly define the entrance. As well, the south elevation illustrates that the majority of fenestration is located on the side of the building that abuts the parking lot, so as to mitigate privacy concerns on shared lot lines to the north. Next slide, please. The proposed development is seeking relief to the following provisions: lot area, lot width, interior side yard, rear side yard setback, and rear yard area. All of the conditions are consistent with the lot fabric of the surrounding neighborhood and do not represent a departure from the existing character of the area and are consistent with the established setback in the area. The proposed development works toward generally improving the condition of the site, namely with the addition of an improved shared pathway, bicycle parking, a dedicated garbage storage area, a new tree planting, and an introduction of articulation on the front of the facade. Ultimately, the proposed development intensifies an existing site in an area that is within 600 meters of rapid transit, within a walkable distance to other amenities, and helps support the intensification goals set out in the official plan. Policing both the official plan and secondary plans support the proposed development, and it meets the purpose of the R4 zone. Next slide, please. So JC has already covered the policy, so I believe that is the conclusion of the presentation, and we're happy to answer questions when necessary.
Thank you for the presentation. For members, I'll be using the raise hand function in the Zoom call in order to determine the order. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? Councillor Trosser?
Hi, thanks so much. I have a few questions. Would it be possible to add more trees to the backyard to address community concerns about lack of trees on the site?
That is certainly something that can be explored. However, at the moment, we're only looking to add the tree to the front, but as I mentioned, is a possibility to look into.
Okay, and so while staff rightly points out that we can't zone for a specific group of people because it is discriminatory, these are very small units, so I'm assuming the audience is more student housing. Am I correct?
I mean, as you just mentioned, we can't say strictly who these types of units are for, but they do add to the diversity of the housing in the area as well. There are 2 larger 4-bedroom units, so I would argue that this contributes to the diversity within the neighborhood on balance.
What's the average size of the units? It's like under 300 square feet, yes? Okay.
That is correct.
Okay. I don't have a problem with student housing, but I mean, I met just yesterday with Carleton University where we brought up the Panda game and we talked about the problem about an over concentration of this kind of housing in Sandy Hill and how it's contributing to some of the challenges in the neighborhood. So I just wanted to be able to make that comment and just say that again, whether it's in Sandy Hill or in Centertown that I represent, we're just seeing more and more of these applications for really, really tiny units. And it's really, really hard to get developers to build anything bigger to allow more than one person to live in a home like that. So I just wanted to put that on the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster. Any other questions for the applicants? See none. Thank you very much for the presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Kavanaugh has her hand up now.
I was going to ask about the bike parking because 11 doesn't seem like very much. Is it possible to expand it, and is it secure?
The bike parking itself is not secure. It is not in any sort of structure itself. However, there is a gate along the pathway, which can be locked for greater security. In terms of the numbers, it meets the zoning requirement for the number of units and is on a 1-to-1 bike stall per unit ratio.
So, well, for those larger units, there could be more than one person there. So, what would they do if the bike rack is all filled up?
Well, they do have larger units. It would be possible to store the bicycles in the unit itself.
That's their only option. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Plante.
Oui, bonjour, merci beaucoup de m'avoir accueilli ce matin. J'aimerais vous féliciter tous et à toutes, premièrement, d'être ici aujourd'hui, de faire partie de ce comité super important. Vous avez devant vous une opportunité de vraiment mettre en vigueur des politiques qui vont faire avancer les dossiers de logement abordable, logement familial, logement social. Et je suis très reconnaissante que vous faites partie de ce comité. I will speak to you very quickly in my capacity, obviously, as councillor, but as also a former member of Action Sandy Hill. SLP is known as sort of the Sandy Hill slumlord, to be very blunt. Their units are known for noise complaints, rats, garbage, and to be honest, they are using our already stretched resources to ensure that they can build these super tiny units and not have to deal with any of the consequences. So for example, our highest number of 311 calls in Sandy Hill are always to smart living properties. This has been since 2014. Again, includes things like rats, garbage, noise, etc. What smart living is trying to do with this application is 2 things. They're trying to weaponize our very serious housing shortage while exhausting city resources to deal with the problems that they help create. In fact, we are going to court in a couple of weeks because smart living is actively trying to take back a bylaw that we have in Sandy Hill to keep garbage inside units. This is a bylaw that we have very specific to Sandy Hill that the last council voted on because they want to ensure that garbage can go outside. So what they're trying to do is get rid of the rules that were put in place specifically to help solve problems that they helped create. I think we need to send a strong message to smart living. We have to let them know that our city is not a place for them to simply make profits and not deal with the problems that they help perpetuate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Plante. Are there any other questions for the applicants? See none. Thank you very much for being here today. And the Next delegation, Marilyn Whitaker. Ms. Whitaker, are you here today? I understand Ms. Whitaker is now joining the call. And Marilyn, you may just need to unmute.
Just seeing that email from the website about what? Oh, the GD bar. Yeah.
Ms. Whitaker have her. Marilyn, it's your turn to speak.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
There we go. We can hear you now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here today, and you have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak before the Planning and Housing Committee about whether the proposal for 535 Chapel should be approved. The current apartment building has 4 units on a lot, which according to GeoWattawa has a frontage of 7.62 meters, depth of 30.47 meters, total area of 232.21 square meters, and a side yard of 0.29 meters. According to the standards under R4UB, the lot does not meet the minimum standards for a 3-unit building. It is a small lot, which is overbuilt. Starting in 2021, neighbors of 535 Chapel and Action Sandy Hill, or ASH, have written city planners expressing concerns about the proposal to add another floor and create a 9-unit building. Chief among these concerns are the lot is only half the minimum lot size and half the lot width for a proposed 9 to 12 unit building. The rear yard setback is 3/4 of the zoning requirements. The project changes create far too significant a deviation from the zoning bylaw to be acceptable. The zoning bylaw was amended and approved by the city in 2020 after extensive work by political leaders, city staff, and members of the public. Why engage in this effort if a 9-unit building can be approved for this small site? Approval would set a bad precedent, not only for Sandy Hill, but for other Ottawa neighborhoods. According to waste management standards in the R4UB zoning, buildings of 6 or more units are subject to the standard waste bylaw, which requires containerized collection or dumpsters. Since the side yard for this proposal is less than 20% of the minimum side yard requirements, waste management is to be addressed through site plan control. Garbage and recycling would be stored in a garbage storage structure at the back of 535 Chapel, where garbage can be tossed between pickups. Items would be removed via the neighboring property at 533 Chapel. This does not seem to be a satisfactory arrangement, especially as there have been problems with rats and student garbage at this and adjacent properties. Garbage storage structure at the back of the property can increase problems with rodents, extend problems onto neighboring properties for neighbors to cope with, be inconvenient for occupants and or foster inattention to garbage cleanup, and reduce green space for absorbing rainwater due to structure size, associated walkway, and pad. This small lot is overbuilt now, and green space and absorption capacity should not be reduced further. ASH asks this committee to not approve the proposed 9-unit building since the proposal meets only half the minimum lot size and lot width of the zoning requirements and is below other minimums. It deviates too far from zoning requirements and would set a bad precedent. Since side yard requirements cannot be met, site plan control is proposed for waste management with a garbage storage arrangement, which poses many concerns. I would add that the developer is proposing to create some tiny units. Now, I noticed in the earlier presentation by the proponent that it's talking about 7 bachelor units. Documents we had before talked about 5 bachelor units. And these would be tiny. They'd be from 218 to 272 square feet, or an average of 234 square feet. And at that point, one unit, which was a 1-bedroom unit, would be 223 square feet, or below the minimum floor area for separated spaces under the Ontario Building Code. Such small units are targeted at a more transient demographic and reduce the potential flexibility of the housing stock. This is contrary to the Sandy Hill Secondary Plan and the recently approved City of Ottawa Official Plan, which talked about the need to accommodate a more diverse population with housing options for different housing types. Thank you for your attention. I'm open to questions.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. I believe your Councillor Plant has a quick question or comment.
Yes, I just want to thank Marilyn for coming today and for commenting. I think we all know that when members of the community come to these kinds of meetings, they're taking time out of their day. Oh, no?
Okay, sorry, can you hear me now? Okay. I just wanted to thank Marilyn for coming out today. I think we all know that when members of the community come to these kinds of meetings, they're often taking time off work, they're taking time away from their families and their normal responsibilities. I believe Marilyn can also confirm, I don't have the minutes of every Action Sandy Hill meeting in front of me, but smart living is discussed at practically every community association meeting, not only for the various problems we have on their properties, but the various bylaw infractions that we deal with every single day. And again, I just want to thank her for coming. I want to thank the members of Sandy Hill for coming together and discussing openly the problems we have with this developer. And I hope we can have a better relationship with them going forward. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Conseiller Plant. Conseiller Toster.
Hi, Marilyn. Thank you so much for coming today. I just have a question. If it was a different developer that was developing this property, or if the proposal was for a couple of larger units instead of a number of micro units, would you feel differently?
Well, we're starting with a situation where the lot is currently overbuilt. If there were perhaps fewer units or units which were larger than has been proposed with this project, there wouldn't be the extent of concerns. It would also perhaps make it easier to have internal garbage storage within the building. And that would be more consistent with the arrangements that Councillor Plant had mentioned. And it's something that Ash has written about and would support. So smaller units, or a smaller number of units, I should say, would be better going forward for this lot.
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering if, back to the applicant, if you would be willing to consider reducing the number of units so that the garbage could be inside the building. Is that something that we can ask, or?
The applicants are no longer a delegation, so we won't be able to pose questions to them, but I'm certain that they're listening and we'll hear that, hear the thrust of that comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Marilyn.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster. Are there any further questions for Marilyn from members? Seeing none, we can move into questions for city staff now. Does anyone have questions for city staff? Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. Could staff provide us some additional context as to the ongoing challenges between the City of Ottawa and smart living?
Chair, if I may, the application that's before us is specific to a site. Planning staff are not familiar with all of the interactions that the city may have with smart living property, and the nature of the comments provided by the ward councillor speak to bylaw or operating requirements, and that's something that planning wouldn't be intimately familiar with. If it's the will of committee, we would be happy to engage with bylaw services to see if they can provide some sort of a summary with respect to that. But I would also flag that the committee, the application that's before the committee today is what's to be considered as opposed to the broader picture of all of their other operations and sites. We do try to look at these objectively and look at them on their planning merits on a site-specific basis.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm aware that we are here to make a decision on whether this application meets planning merits or not. But I'm still interested to know what the history is with this corporation and the city. If the city is engaged in a number of matters, sometimes you can use an application as leverage to address existing challenges that exist in the community, not trying to deny an application, rather trying to understand the context that exists. So if Ms. Etna is not able to answer that question, I would like to have a little more information before this comes to council, just for that context. And I appreciate Mr. Moody's comments today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Derek, is that something you're willing to undertake?
Yes, we're happy to accept that as direction.
We'll write that up as direction for the minutes. Councillor Curry.
Thank you. And I agree with what Councillor Brockington's trying to get at. I agree this is planning committee. So on that note, the setbacks that that resident was talking about and the having the garbage inside, can I understand, is the garbage going to be inside or outside? Given that there is an existing bylaw, they may be challenging it right now, but is it currently in this design, the garbage inside or outside?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe I have details relating to how garbage is managed today. I know that the proposed garbage enclosure is not there today, so I can only assume that garbage today is managed in each of the existing units separately. But this is an assumption.
Okay, I think we need to get clear information on that before we get to council as well. Just if that is an existing bylaw, then this application should work with that bylaw. Whether it changes or not in the future is a separate matter. The other is about the setbacks that are allowed. So that is fundamentally why this is in front of us, because they're asking for something that wouldn't be allowed right now.
I'm not sure what the question is, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Curry, did you want to put that another way or?
Sure. So given what the resident talked to us about, what they're asking for in terms of those setbacks is exactly why this is in front of us. I mean, I understand there's a change to how many units would be available here and the size of the units, everything else, but that is also in part of this application, or is that all still site plan?
The number of units is not a factor in this zoning bylaw amendment. What we are, or what Planning and Housing Committee will be considering are the setbacks for the footprint that is currently existing today. Therefore, it is a recognition of an existing footprint. They are adding an additional story to the building. However, the height is permitted for the proposed use.
So, but because they're asking for these setbacks, that potentially prevents them from putting garbage inside the building, because they're using it for additional units instead of a space for the garbage. This is what I'm trying to get at. So I understand we're going to get more information. We'll hear more at council about the relationship between this company and our bylaw services. But does this, if we approve this today, does this not prevent them from actually creating a new design where the garbage would have to be inside, because they're using the setback application here to create more units, living units?
Mr. Chair, the proposed garbage enclosure meets the zoning bylaw requirements. But the councillor is correct that if the zoning bylaw is approved as is proposed, that it does not preclude the applicant from making internal changes to the proposal in order to accommodate for garbage inside the building.
Okay, good to know. My last question then, how would we get them to do that?
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of committee. I've met some of you, so I'll introduce myself. Andrew McCrae, Manager of Development Review Central. To answer that question, we have to remember that the proposal before us is for an existing apartment building, and it's an addition of a third floor on top of that existing apartment building. I don't want to speak on behalf of the applicants, but I can imagine it would be very difficult to retrofit the existing building to put waste indoors with the additional units. What's before you is a proposal that has a design with a rear yard accessory building where garbage is internalized in that building. It's not in the principal building, but it is indoors and controlled. And the side yard and rear yard variances are indicative of the existing footprint of the building. That addition going up on the third floor is required to match those existing setbacks with the story going straight up. In one sense, those two items are not directly related.
Okay, well, I'll let the counselor from the area ask additional questions of clarification to see if there is a plan here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curry. Councillor Troster?
Thank you. And so as a new counselor and a new member of this committee, I'm just curious of city staff. So when we have a situation where a certain neighborhood is flooded with an overabundance of a very specific kind of housing, not even speaking about who lives there, but let's say very small micro units, what tools do we have as a planning committee or as council to have an impact on that mix? Is that something that needs to be added to the official plan? Is that, because we're having a conversation here. On one hand, it's about a simple variance request in regard to setbacks, but we're actually having a broader conversation about a particular landlord and a particular type of housing that is obviously overrepresented in Sandy Hill. So it's more of a general question, not about the specific application, but instead of arguing about setbacks, is there a way to have an impact as a planning committee?
Mr. Chair, the new R4, newish R4 zoning that applies to this property in particular does have a provision that requires at least 25% of the units to be 2-bedroom or larger, which is consistent with the official plan for large bedroom units. So in those R4 zones, there is zoning in effect that does require that mix of units. I don't know if when we're looking at the new zoning bylaw and implementing the policy of the new OP, if that's going to be something that is looked at further, but that is in effect today through the R4 zoning.
Councillor Troster, is that?
So this existing building though is all micro units though, or are there larger apartments within the building that these are being added onto?
Apologies, Mr. Chairman, just looking for the reference to the unit mix that is proposed. So just to clarify on what Andrew just said, the size in square meters is not a factor in the size of the units as per, like, according to the R4 zone. It is the number of bedrooms that is in question.
Well, okay. That might just mean we need to think about more policy tools in the future.
But is it compliant?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And that is something I think we have an opportunity to do through the comprehensive zoning bylaw review is even where we've recently created new R4 rules, we'll have the opportunity to tweak those. So, Conseil Plante.
Oui, merci. Je voulais juste répondre à la question que quelqu'un avait concernant SLP et la relation qu'ils ont avec la communauté. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the garbage units that we have already, I'm just going to give an example at 29 Russell, where they also have an application, and I know we're talking about the application today. This is also an area where we have problematic issues with garbage. Most of their units in Sandy Hill, we have also very serious issues with garbage. And so what I'm trying to get at and what I'm trying to imply today is that we're not going to solve this issue. We've been trying to resolve it since 2012, and we're not going to resolve it today by not approving this application. I'm just trying to sort of say a larger message that this is a very problematic developer in the area, in the sense that they don't feel like bylaw rules, especially on the issue of garbage, apply to them, and they're actively trying to overturn them. And so if we're, and Councillor Leeper and I were having a discussion earlier at Council last week, can we talk about sort of social issues in the context of planning applications and vice versa? If we have any tools today in which we can compel them to sort of agree to better rules around garbage, that would be very helpful, and I would be open to having those discussions. But so far, it has been radio silence.
Staff have any comments on that? Oh, so we'll take it as a comment. Councillor Kavanaugh, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I have one in my ward of smart living. And it did start off as problematic, and we worked with them to resolve issues, but it's not Sandy Hill where there's many of them. It's only because we're in proximity to Algonquin College. My question is about, and this is really more of a bylaw question, but in terms of the garbage, we just had our presentation yesterday on solid waste management, and is it mandatory recycling? I don't know if that would help at all, but I've noticed that in some of the big problem with the units is that it's just big bags of garbage and it's a big mess. And what kind of oversight is there? Maybe that was a question for the applicant, but in terms of, like, obviously they're not responding, but is there any way that we as a city can make it obligatory through bylaw for them to have to respond when there are complaints, that there's a go-to person, a phone number that gets answered, an email that gets responded to when there are concerns, because that's something that's very important. I mean, it shouldn't have to get to that point there, but there should be oversight, and I think that's the concern. Is taking responsibility, not just build and go. So what's in our toolbox for that?
Mr. Chair, while I'm not completely equipped to answer the last part of the question, the first part relating to whether or not there are recycling facilities proposed for the building, I can say that although this proposal is affected by Bill 23 in that it's no longer required to go through site plan, it did go through site plan review for, let's say through 95% of the process before Bill 23 came into effect. During that time, it was reviewed by Waste Management Services, and there were requirements for green bin, blue bin, black bins, which are implemented into this final version of the site plan. All that to say that the waste storage area is large enough to accommodate those bins as shown on the plans.
So we may have lost that because of the change of legislation. Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Chair, what I'm saying is that the site plan review process that was undertaken has looked at the situation, and these plans will hopefully transfer over to the building code services review when they're applying for building permit.
Okay, I hope so. But I realize we don't have bylaw experts here, but what can we do in terms of oversight for buildings? Because that seems to be the crux of the problem.
Chair, excuse me. We're happy to connect with bylaw to provide some guidance with respect to enforcement provisions as part of that package of information that we'll be providing to committee members ahead of time. Responding to the operations of these buildings is outside of the direct control of planning, and we're happy to get that information and provide it to the members of committee.
Okay, and if necessary, perhaps we should be looking at it for the future to strengthen it, because it sounds like it's very much needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here. Forgive my ignorance for this, but the bylaw about garbage having to be stored indoors, is that within the enclosures of the building as per the site plan, or sorry, as per whatever the drawing is there, or is there some weird definition that the applicants can kind of play with?
Mr. Chair, section 143 of the zoning bylaw requires some sort of properties to store garbage inside the main building specifically. So you couldn't, a proponent couldn't store it in an accessory structure and call it inside the building for the purpose of that section. That being said, developments in excess of 5 units are not subject to that provision. Therefore, in this case, they are allowed to have garbage stored in an accessory structure.
And have they shared any plans for what their going to do in terms of that storage? Obviously outside the main building.
Mr. Chair, I can speak to the final version or the latest version of the site plans that I have in front of me, and they show the accessory structure fitted with all of the different bins appropriately sized as per the waste management comments we've received.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lowe. Councillor Gower, Vice Chair Gower.
No questions, but perhaps a stating the obvious comment. I think the zoning bylaw amendment here is okay from a planning perspective, but obviously we're still lagging behind in city policies and processes to recognize the impact that intensification has on communities. And in this particular community, they're at the vanguard of intensification in the city of Ottawa and have been for a number of years. So this committee and other city committees and city departments have their work cut out for them, I think, in the next few years to catch up to the reality of what intensification needs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay. One quick question for staff from myself. If committee were to refuse this application today, what is the process moving to council?
The report would go forward with a recommendation to refuse it to council, and depending on how council chose to accept that or approve the staff recommendation, it could result in an appeal to the board. And if that were the case, if council did not support it, then legal services would contract outside planning expertise to support that application at the board.
As well, Mr. Chair, should a refusal come forward, planning rationale will need to support that.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, is that in refusing an application, committee or council are going to be required to provide reasons for the refusal that will stand up to the scrutiny of the Ontario Land Tribunal. So something to consider as we move ahead with a vote. I see no further questions for staff. Therefore, we'll move on to the voting. There is a technical amendment that is in front of us. Is that technical amendment carried? Carried. Thank you very much. And I'll move to a voice vote, please, on the main item as amended.
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Curry,
Yes.
Councillor Dudas. Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Johnson. Oh, Councillor Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Councillor Kelly.
No.
Councillor Kitts.
Yes.
Councillor Lowe.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Troster.
No.
Vice Chair Gower
Yes.
and Chair Leeper.
Yes,
9 yeas, 2 nays.
that item carries. Thank you very much for a good discussion. It is deep in the weeds on the garbage bylaw, and I certainly would encourage members to speak to city staff about how waste is handled and what some of the opportunities are coming up to take a look at what is a very serious impact of intensification. So with that item, I don't know if Councillor Johnson can hear us, but Councillor Johnson, we'd invite your presence back in the room. We'll move on to the zoning bylaw amendment for 1525 and 1533 Goth Avenue. In this instance, I understand that the applicants will be making the presentation, so I don't have a staff presentation today. There is a technical amendment on this one. Councillor or Vice Chair Gower, could I ask you to just put that on the table, please?
Yes, a technical amendment. Whereas the applicant has advised the further requirement for a site-specific exemption that reduces the minimum setback for any wall from 1.8 meters to 0.6 meters. And whereas staff have no objections to this proposed reduction, Therefore, be it resolved that respect to the report, the Planning and Housing Committee amend document 2 by adding a clause to column 5, exceptions XXX1 and XXX2 with the following wording. The minimum setback for any wall of a residential use building to a private way is 0.6 meters. And be it further resolved that pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act, no further notice be given.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair. If anyone is able to let Councillor Johnson know that we've resumed debate. Oh, I see, Councillor Johnson, thank you very much. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move straight to the proponents who are going to make a presentation. My understanding is that Nadia DeSanti is here to do that. Nadia, are you online?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I am.
Good morning. Thank you for being here, and you have 5 minutes to make a presentation to the committee.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Crozier. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of Planning and Housing Committee. My name is Nadia DeSanti. I am a practice lead at WSP in Ottawa. I am also here today with Ms. Carrie Lewis, Executive Director from Integral Health of Ottawa. Next slide, please. In terms of site context, the proposed development is at 1525 Goth Avenue. The existing, there is an existing detached dwelling there that would be demolished. Just in terms of area context, we do have an institutional use, that being Gabriel Roy Public School to the north of the site. And the residential area consists of 1 and 2 story residential mix of uses, including detached and semi-detached dwellings. Next slide, please. So the property at 1525 Goth Avenue is occupied by a 2-story detached dwelling with vehicular access onto Goth Avenue. And I'll show the vehicular access a little bit more in the proposed site plans later in the presentation. The building and the site at 1533 Goth Avenue is occupied by, a 1.5-story group home. There is an existing hedge along the eastern property line and trees along the northern property line. Detached dwellings are located to the east and west of the site. Next slide, please. So this is the existing development at 1533 Goth Avenue. So this is the 1.5-story group home, and there are 10 parking spaces to the rear of the property. The driveway from Goth Avenue leads to the back of that property where the parking is located. Next slide, please. The proposed development at 1525 Goth Avenue is for a 2-story low-rise apartment with approximately 10 units. The image on the right is the proposed site plan, and you can see the existing driveway that's shown in white, and the proposed driveway access off of that existing driveway is shown in the darker gray. So it's going towards the west of the property, and that leads to 9 parking spaces. So in behind the proposed development at 1525 Goth Avenue. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the proposed development would consist of 10 self-contained units, 6 1-bedroom units and 4 2-bedroom units. 4 of those units would be visitable or barrier-free spaces. There would be a multi-purpose room with kitchenette, a laundry room. There would also be office space for Integral House's operations and administration. An exterior amenity area. There would be access to the existing children's playground, which currently exists at 1533 Goth Avenue, and some on-site resident services. So in total, both of the parking lots, both the proposed and the existing, would be a total of 19. So 10 existing at 1533 and 9 proposed with the new development. And that 9 includes residence spaces, visitor and barrier-free spaces. We're also proposing 7 bicycle spaces for the proposed development. Next slide, please. These are some elevations that were provided in our planning rationale and our submission with the rezoning. So again, 2-story building. Next slide, please. This is a view of the elevation from looking from the south. Next slide, please. And from the east. Next slide, please. And from the west. Next slide, please. The site is designated in the new official plan as outer urban transect with neighborhood overlay. The existing zoning is residential, second density zone, subzone N. A low-rise apartment is not a permitted use in this zone. Next slide, please. In terms of the proposed zoning, we are seeking 2 special exceptions for each of the properties. Area A is 1525 Goth, Area B 1533 Goth, to limit the low-rise apartment only on Area A, maximum stories 2, building height 8.5 meters. Next slide, please. These are the details of the proposed zoning amendment for 1525 Goth Avenue. I realize I have 17 seconds left. Next slide, please. And here's the proposed zoning for 1533 Goth Avenue, again, prohibiting a low-rise apartment as well as other uses for that site. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions as well as with our client, Ms. Carrie Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing. My understanding is that we're promoting Ms. Lewis to be part of the delegation as well. Are there any questions from members for the applicant? I see. Oh, Councillor Trosper.
Hi, I just wanted to give the applicant an opportunity to just tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and the type of women that'll be helped by this building.
Everyone, thank you so much for considering our application today. Integral House of Ottawa is a shelter for women, non-binary, two-spirit, and gender diverse folks and their dependents fleeing violence. We've been operating in the city of Ottawa since 1976, and I'm sure it's no surprise to any of you that we are struggling to provide space to people when they need it most. Last year, we turned away 941 individuals seeking safe space, and the problem continues to intensify. Our hope with this project is to create 10 independent living spaces where folks can move from this emergency shelter that currently exists into second stage housing where they can have some independence while they're waiting to obtain permanent housing, which, as I'm sure you all know, is really challenging in this day and age. Rents are unaffordable, and most of the folks that we serve rely on subsidized housing, and the wait times continue to increase. Just for context, 10 years ago, the average stay in our shelter was about 12 weeks. Now we have many families who have been here since last spring. So we're seeing the averages increase to 6 to 12 months, depending on family size. So yeah, the need for our services continue to increase. And we're really hopeful that this project will help alleviate the pressure on all of us who provide these emergency services to families in our communities.
Thank you for all the work you do to help women and children fleeing violence in our community.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster. Nadia and Carrie, I see no further questions. Oh, jumping in fast. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much for this, Carrie, and the work that you do. So this is for children as well. I think people need to understand that this is often women and children.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Women, children, and pets.
Okay, so this is secondary level, so people will be staying there a longer time. So I guess it's important that you're near schools.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, because I noticed when I was looking at the file that there's a couple of schools nearby, so that might be helpful to the situation. This is the first time you're offering secondary spaces, but I don't think there's very many. I mean, the other one I'm familiar with is Harmony House. So how many overall would this make?
So Harmony House is the only second stage shelter in Eastern Ontario. So, and they have 16 units. So we're proposing 10 to add to that.
Yeah, it's still a drop in the bucket, but it's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Any further questions for the delegation? I don't see any. Thank you very much, both to Nadia and Carrie, for being here, and thank you very much for the work that you do. It is critical in our city. We also have signed up a Tanya Treshokas. I apologize if I've gotten that name incorrect. I assume that you are here.
Okay, sorry, did you call for Tanya?
Yep, Tanya, it's you have 5 minutes to present to the committee.
Okay, thank you very much, committee members and councillors, for your time today. I did not intend to speak to this matter today, as I thought prior discussions with city officials would be given proper consideration. But after reading the recommendation before you today, I realized that this is not the case. My voice and the collective voice of Goth residents has been disregarded, undermined, and misrepresented. As the committee will see, there is a big safety issue here that has been completely glossed over without justification. I'll preface my comments by saying that I understand the general direction set forth by Ontario's provincial policy statement in the city's new official plan regarding intensification and public transit. However, this should by no means lead to compromise safety in our community, and that's exactly what this recommendation allows for. In the supporting documentation you received, the city highlighted resident concerns over an increase in traffic, but deemed that there was no issue. However, I made it very clear to city officials that my concerns weren't just about an increase in traffic, but also the fact that inadequate parking is an existing problem that is creating very dangerous conditions for the safe mobility of pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles on Goth. To elaborate, an 18-wheeler truck makes weekly deliveries to 1525 and 1533 Goth. This truck is unable to enter the driveway because vehicles are parked alongside the 1533 property and not in designated parking space. There are more than 4 or 5 cars at times. The result is that the truck remains on the road and completely blocks off access to my property or neighboring properties, will maneuver haphazardly if a resident approaches the driver, and impedes visibility for vehicles and pedestrians overall. This is compounded by the fact that there are vulnerable individuals at my residence, as well as the neighboring residents that require ambulatory attention, sometimes regularly. Again, I stress here, this is on a weekly basis. These deliveries are not on occasion, and presumably with the addition of 10 dwelling units, this problem will only magnify in terms of offloading time and additional deliveries. Bearing in mind these safety concerns, I can't comprehend why the city would go ahead and justify to you that, quote, the reduction in residential parking has been determined to be suitable. Let me be very clear that this isn't just a few parking spots. This is 12 spots in total. To be frank, I'm baffled by the complete disregard for safety here by the applicant and city, particularly when you consider that multiple residents have voiced concerns about parking multiple times with photographic evidence. The site attracts a high volume of young children commuting, as it's surrounded by 3 neighboring schools, a community center, and the like. And the proposal contravenes policies and principles on safety as set forth in the provincial policy statement and new official plan. Let me remind everyone that while there are directives around intensification, redevelopment, and active transportation, there is accompanying language about avoiding or mitigating risk to public safety. There is not a single substantive reference to avoiding or mitigating risk in the city's recommendation. For some unknown reason, city officials allowed the applicant to dictate this recommendation on its own terms. Whether this is a systemic issue or not, I don't know, but the city deferred to whatever the applicant had to say to justify its development plans. It placed more value on the applicant's hypotheticals on what constitutes adequate parking over factual unified concerns raised by Goth residents. It placed more value on limiting parking due to site restrictions as opposed to concerns around safety, all of which has led to a very questionable recommendation that is neither supported by policy nor fact. Given these very concerning omissions, it begs the question, what else has been omitted that the committee and councillors will benefit from investigating further? This entire proposal and recommendation hinges on inaccuracies, and it is deeply concerning because it comes at the expense of public safety and the safety of children in our community. This is, without question, completely unacceptable. So I ask the applicant, city staff, community members, and councillors, how have we possibly reached the conclusion that it is okay to undercut parking space in this proposal? Why are we not enforcing the minimums as prescribed to facilitate a safe space for our residents and particularly our children? Why is the city okay with compromising safety when other feasible options are available? This proposal includes the demolishment of 1525 Goth, so why not take the opportunity to make safety a top priority instead of cutting corners? I really can't reconcile how the applicant is operating here, nor the city for that matter. In view of the foregoing, I'm urgently asking this committee to reject this recommendation and facilitate a proper forum for engagement on these issues. Any other decision will simply convey to Ottawa residents that legitimate safety concerns do not matter in the city's assessment of development proposals. Surely this is not the impression the city wants to make, and we can work towards a common ground as a community to make sure we get things right. Thank you, committee members and councillors. I look forward to your response.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Are there any questions from members for the delegation? Councillor Curry.
Thank you for that. Tanya, just a quick question. The 18-wheelers you say that are there that are creating quite a problem, what are they delivering? Do you have any idea? It's very specifically weekly supplies to one of the buildings?
Tanya, you're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me?
We can, thank you. Did you hear the question?
Can you repeat the... No, I didn't. I was getting prompted for unmuting. Sorry
Okay.
about that.
Councillor Curry, can I ask you to repeat that, please?
Yeah, I don't know if you know this information, but the 18-wheelers you're talking about that are creating some problems there, do you know what they're delivering? Is this a weekly, sounded to me like a weekly supply delivery that would then continue with this new regime? I'm just wondering more information about this, whether this could be mitigated.
Yeah, no, this is a weekly supply of some sort. It comes from Cisco trucks. So whatever they provide to the housing, I'm not sure. Again, the proposal that's going through with respect to some of this zoning bylaw amendment has to do with the creation of 10 additional dwelling units. So as I mentioned, this problem is only going to magnify in terms of additional frequency of deliveries or greater offloading time. I will say I'm quite disappointed that, as I mentioned, this concern was glossed over and nowhere mentioned or presented to you in the city report. They took my concerns around traffic and really grounded it in the fact of an assessment of increased traffic, and sure, that's part of it, but I gave very concrete examples of the issues, the very big safety issues, the fact that I can't safely leave my residence or enter it, neither can neighboring residences. In fact, if I'm being quite frank, I was so incensed yesterday that I called the city planner, Tracy, and forwarded a photograph showing the exact lineup of cars that she confirmed would impede a safe delivery of these goods. So to sit here and have the city propose to you, the reduction in residential parking has been determined to be suitable. This is not grounded in fact. This is not grounded in safety. And not just myself, but multiple residents have voiced this, and it's nowhere present in any of this recommendation. Mm-hmm. And there's like this is a small street, it's a side street. These are weekly deliveries. Presumably they're going to increase, or as I mentioned, offload times vary. If and when a driver is present, then there's quick maneuvering of the 18-wheeler. Like this is incomprehensible that is the recommendation that was brought forward to you today with no further discussion test. You can see in their planning rationale, there's complete deference to what the applicant says. The applicant has other properties, so they know what they're talking about in terms of parking. No, I presented you with facts, so did other residents. Their site restrictions, to be quite frank, I don't care that there's site restrictions because that doesn't give you justification to restrict 12 parking spaces at the expense of safety. Like that's not the intent, like I said, between some of these policy directives that are going on with the province and the city. Certainly, and in fact, the language is quite clear. It refers to land use and promoting things like active transportation, but in a safe manner.
Thank you very much, Tanya. We'll ask more questions about this for sure.
I just want to make quick note that Lily Zhu and Tracy Scaramuzino are here, and we'll have an opportunity to pose questions to staff in a moment or two. Councillor Johnson.
I'm sorry, I apologize. I can't hear you very well. I've requested headphones to be able to hear you better. I just wanted to get clarity because I could hear the concerns about safety, but I'm trying to understand what the dimensions of those concerns are. So,
Okay.
Tanya, if you could just clearly help me to understand. So are you suggesting that by adding the density with the 12 extra spots, those 12 extra cars are going to be that compromise the safety of the children that are already at the school? I'm just trying to understand exactly what we need to follow up with staff.
Okay, so the city recommendation has indicated that at 1525 and at 1533, there can be a reduction in available parking spaces beyond the minimum of what is required. Currently, there is a parking space issue, which I referenced to city officials during some of these consultation periods, whether by written comments or by phone calls. So the reality is at 1533, there is insufficient parking space. And so what happens is that vehicles from that residence park up and alongside their property, and it pretty much just about touches Goth Avenue. So because of this inadequate parking and the fact that all of these cars, like I mentioned, it can be 4 or 5 sometimes, are parked up at the front, 18-wheelers that are making weekly deliveries can't make the turn to get onto this property. So they're stuck with options, either block off neighboring properties, and I'll also mention there's a fire hydrant right there. So either block that entirely off and make the delivery, or make the turn and take out the vehicles that are there. So I have a real issue because I've stressed this to the city, and I've stressed this to convey to the applicant why there continues to be a push for less parking at the expense of safety issues. Like, this isn't just like a little cargo van. These are 18-wheelers. This road, as has been explained before you today, is an access point for many, many schools, many community issues. I have a young child, and it's completely unacceptable, this proposal to you that is not grounded in fact. It's not grounded in policy measures around safety. And not what I think the residents, and in fact, it's not just myself communicating this, it's multiple interested parties, and it hasn't been conveyed to you once. That's a big issue. And what I'm seeing, it's not like the applicant has brought forward the minimum, and I'm saying to you, city, the minimum's not enough. They haven't even met the minimum.
Thanks,
Like, what
Tanya.
is going on here? How can you say that this is okay?
Councillor Johnson has indicated that that was very helpful. I appreciate that response. Councillor Bradley has a question for you as well.
Thanks
thank you
for your delegation today. It's not really a question as much as it is just a comment for clarity for the committee around the weekly delivery. So it is a Cisco truck that's delivering food to the existing shelter that's there at 1533 Goth. The application that's before us is for 10 independent apartment units. And so the residents there will be doing their own grocery shopping. So this application will not generate additional delivery. So just a point of clarity there.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradley. Does anyone else have any questions for Tanya for the delegation? Seeing none. Tanya, thank you very much for coming out today. I'm certain that some of these questions will be pursued with staff. Speaking of which, Lily and Tracy are here with us. Does anyone have any questions for the city planners on the file? Councillor Bradley?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to touch base on one of Tanya's concerns that she raised around parking. If you could just comment on the parking that is proposed for this site and how that's in line with our policies, and if any additional traffic is anticipated to be generated on Goth.
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. The parking that is being requested for this application for 1525 Goth for the new building is a reduction from 12 spaces down to 7. And for the existing building at 1533 from 17 spaces down to 10. And the applicant has provided us rationale that based on the other uses that they have in the city, that they do have an oversupply of parking spaces at their other locations. Not everyone owns a private vehicle. So that is coming from the applicant themselves. In terms of city policy, as you're all, I'm sure, well aware, the city is trying to encourage everyone to get out of their private vehicles and to take public transport and other active modes of transportation. And so this is in keeping with those policy directions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I see that there's lots of questions from my colleagues. So before we move on to that, though, I just did want to echo my support for this application. What's before the committee is really 10 affordable residential units inside the Greenbelt. To me, this is a perfect example of what gentle intensification looks like. Interval House has been a longtime neighbor in Gloucester Southgate Ward and a good neighbor, and I expect that relationship to continue. So I hope that you will support this application today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradley. Vice Chair Gower.
Thank you, Chair. I also support this application, but I'm curious about access to transit, what that would look like for residents, especially given the reduction in parking spaces.
Chair, the site is right beside public school. Across the road from the public school is another elementary school. The site is about 600 meters to Bank Street, where you find lots of transit stations, grocery stores, restaurants, and potential employment uses as well. It's about 7 minutes walking to those destinations. There are policies throughout the official plan to encourage supporting of the diversity, different modes of the transportation, such as walking, cycling, transit, as well as driving. This is a very modest development. It's only 2 stories of 10 units. The reduced parking, the impact is very minimum. This is the ideal location to consider and encourage different choices of the transportation modes. Even if this is not interval house operation model, if this is any low-rise apartment, staff would still consider the requested reduced parking be reasonable and in line with the official plan and will be supported as well.
Okay, thank you. Something I want to follow up on offline, just on some of these reports, especially where there's a specific reduction in parking. I think it'd be worth mentioning in reports coming to committee what the current and planned access to transit is. And this may change in a few years too. It's probably closer to South Keys than to Leitrim Station, but just to have a full context of what walkability and access to alternative modes of transportation would look like. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gower. And I'd be very interested in following up on that with staff as well, just to get a better idea of the routes that are serving these developments. Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. And to supplement Councillor Gower's comments, yeah, the 93 is one of the more frequent local routes that we have down there. So it is very well served. My question's more so for the arrangement when the 18-wheeler deliveries come in. The Goth Avenue is obviously wide enough for these weekly deliveries, but how does the truck maneuver itself in and out of the property? Do you know?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I've been advised by Interval House that the Cisco delivery truck does come weekly, and up until the fall of last year, the truck used to back in down the driveway and deliver their groceries. However, apparently there's a new driver now that isn't comfortable backing in. And it's for that reason that I've been told that's why the vehicle has been parked on the street and has, yes, been blocking driveways in order to make the deliveries. According to Interval House, they have indicated along the driveway, they've placed some small little pylons to ask or as a reminder to the employees not to park along the driveway, to give a wider width to allow greater comfort for the Cisco truck to be able to back in. And that's how they've been trying to ensure that it does get off the street.
And since they've put those little markers there, has the Cisco truck been able to make its maneuvers?
My understanding, well, I can't say, I don't live there personally. I've been told that the Cisco truck still is sometimes on the street. There is a delivery coming today, so I don't know, apparently every Tuesday they get their deliveries. So I can't say for certain how that has been working.
Okay, and is this like a full size? When they say an 18-wheeler, is it like a full size 18-wheeler, or is it one of those ones with the kind of the shorter trailer? Or is that dependent
It's
on?
been
if they're
referred to as an
vehicles?
18-wheeler,
Yeah.
so I don't know the specifics.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you're able to get the applicant back on the call, but perhaps they can provide further clarification.
Can we do that?
We can if the committee is okay with that. Yes. Yeah, I'll ask the clerk to bring Nadia back to answer the specifics on that. And Nadia, are you prepared to answer that?
Yes, I can. I'll defer to Carrie because of the operations of the property, but I'm happy to answer any further questions.
So yes, Kenya had come over to let us know that this was a concern back in the fall, and at that time, we spoke to the driver. He explained what the issue was, and so he told us that he needed the right side of our laneway clear so that he can back in. So since that time, we've been putting up pylons along the right side to make sure, just to remind staff not to park there. And as far as I know, it's only been a couple of times since the fall that they have parked on the street. There was one time because one of our neighbors was having their laneway resurfaced, and there were some very large trucks that the Cisco truck couldn't get around. That said, I was on vacation for 2 weeks, so my staff were telling me that the truck came down the laneway and that it hasn't been an issue. But one of the things that I have done in the past is provided my cell phone number to our neighbors, and I will actually deliver that again today, just so that if it keeps happening, they can text me and I'll go talk to the driver right away. I agree that the truck shouldn't be parking on the laneway, or sorry, on the road. And I'm very happy to work with our neighbors to make sure that they don't do that anymore. We'll deal with it every time until we get it down pat.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, supplementary comment. Is there any way to maybe work with Cisco to use a smaller vehicle, or is the amount of supplies that gets delivered, like, does that actually warrant the full 18-wheeler, or is it more a question of the routing and all that logistical good stuff?
I imagine that Cisco has a standard size truck that they use because they're delivering to multiple locations. I can inquire, but I suspect that that's not something that they'll be able to change.
There are multiple other councillors just on the list, and we're fairly far down the details of the operational on a land use planning file. Do you have any further questions?
No, just something to leave with the applicant for consideration. That's all.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I think over the course of the next little while, if you want to chat with Councillor Bradley more about some of those operational details ahead of a vote on council. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to Carrie and the team on this project. I'll be supporting the application. But what I want to ask is, how are we categorizing this? This is a city question. This is not permanent housing. Our goal of the city is affordable permanent housing. Is this considered to be, well, this is supported housing in a shelter type category, but secondary, and it is necessary. But the object is to get these families into permanent affordable housing. Is that not correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. And yes, I believe the ultimate goal for Interval House and for these families is to have them be placed or have them find permanent housing in the community.
So the reason this is necessary to have this is because we don't have enough affordable housing. Is that what's happening?
I would assume yes, and potential that the residents do need some additional support. There will be counseling available for these women as they transition from the group home to the transitional housing. So potentially there is a need for them to have additional support before they actually move into a permanent housing situation.
Yeah, well, thank you. But I think it just draws attention to the fact why we need more affordable housing. And I applaud the fact that we have this and that we're giving support to these families. But we need to look at more options and to get more affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Curry?
Yeah, thanks. And I think that conversation, even I know it was details, Councillor Leeper, but I think it was sorted out, you know, just now we have a commitment from the people who will be working there that they'll look into that. I'm sure Councillor Bradley will look at all options, you know, maybe there's a no parking, no stopping, you know, there's a lot of solutions to that stuff. I actually have a question on the technical amendment. Because I didn't quite understand it. It seemed like quite a technical amendment, but if it is simply just that there was an error in the report and that at any wall that this measurement could be changed, it's not something that's being added in just as an extra thing to the application. It's really just that there was an error in the application.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, there was an error in that, I believe through some rejigging of the building on site, that the building did get shifted a little bit back towards the rear of the property, and in doing so brought the rear wall of the residential building closer to the private way, which is the driveway into the parking. And in such, it created an issue, a non-compliance issue with the zoning. And so it was just recently discovered. And so that's why it came about as a technical amendment.
Okay, so, but it just seems to me any wall, does that not mean that this entire building could be changed?
Sorry, I'm not clear on what you mean by the entire building could be changed.
Well, it says the minimum setback for any wall. Like
Oh,
any wall in the entire building?
Okay, so perhaps I see what you're saying now. Perhaps that could be revised to specify that it's the rear wall. And that would clarify, and that would address the actual issue.
Okay, well, maybe we can change that between now and council, but I found that strange. I've never seen that in a technical amendment for something to just say any wall can just just with this amendment change. So if that could be very clear as to what wall they're talking about, because I appreciate that, you know, somebody didn't recognize that and there has to be a change, but any wall is a little much.
Yes, thank you. We'll look into that before council.
Chris, I wouldn't mind getting that done today. So the specific wall in question is the minimum setback for the rear wall of the residential use building to a private way is 0.6 meters. Is that the more accurate way to put this? It's the rear wall to which this is really meant to apply?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I'm wondering if Councillor Gower would amend the motion.
Yes, I would.
Okay. So the motion is before us. Will now be the minimum setback for the rear wall of the residential use building to a private way is 0.6 meters. If that's okay with the committee.
Super.
To a vote on that, Councillor Curry, does that satisfy your concerns?
Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to go over one more time whether or not there's any infrastructure pressures that might be associated with a project of this size in this zoning upgrade.
Through you, Mr. Chair, our city infrastructure staff have reviewed all of the servicing issues, the current situation, as well as the proposed development, as well as other proposed developments in the area, and they have no concerns with capacity.
Okay, thank you for the answer to that question. Also, being in an outer urban transect, which is making me very excited, we have the opportunity to create this gentle density that the city so desperately needs. But my residents in College Ward are concerned about pressures on infrastructure, on street parking, on visibility, on plows being able to get through. You can substitute 18-wheeler for a plow. You can substitute 18-wheeler for an emergency vehicle. These are all real design issues that come with the outer urban transects, but we will be looked at to create the density that some other neighborhoods cannot afford for this missing middle. And so we will have to address these real pressures for neighbors. And I look forward to being able to wrestle through this on future applications.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Are there any further questions of staff? Does anyone wish to make any further comment on this application? I've asked that the motion go up in its final form, the amending motion, before we vote on that. Is that amending motion carried? Thank you. And on the main motion, I'll just ask for a vote, please.
Councillor Brockington,
Yes.
Councillor Curry,
Yes.
Councillor Dudas,
Yes.
Councillor Johnson,
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Councillor Kelly,
Yes.
Councillor Kitts,
Yes.
Councillor Lowe,
Yes.
Councillor Tierney,
Yes.
Councillor Troster,
Yes.
Vice Chair Gower,
Yes.
and Chair Leeper.
Yes.
12 yeas.
Thank you very much. That item carries. Our final item on today's agenda is the new zoning bylaw revised work plan timelines. And I've asked that staff give us a presentation. I'll give Carol a moment to make her way to the desk and get the presentation up online. Thank you very much, Kelly. The presentation is ready to go. Carol, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me clearly? Okay. Okay, so I'm Carol Ruddy. I'm the program manager of the zoning unit. And today I'm here to present a report concerning the timelines for the new zoning bylaw. So the report recommends the addition of 6 months to the project timelines. The proposed timelines would bring the final draft of the zoning bylaw to council for approval in Q4, so the fourth quarter of 2025, instead of the second quarter of 2025. The revised timeline will comply with the Planning Act requirements that new zoning provisions be enacted within 3 years of the approval of the official plan. So this slide, could I have the slides advanced, please? So we're on the next slide, please. Wonderful, thank you. So this slide compares the current and proposed work plans. Currently, the first and second drafts of the new zoning bylaw are scheduled to be released in Q3 of 2023 and Q3 of 2024, with the final draft brought to council for approval in Q2 2025. The proposed revisions to the work plan would result in the first and second drafts being released in Q1 of 2024, Q1 of 2025, and the final draft brought to council for approval in the fourth quarter of 2025. So the factors impacting the project timelines. The additional time in the work plan is needed in response to the 8-month delay of approval of the official plan and to respond to sweeping changes to the Ontario Provincial Planning Framework. Staff are evaluating the implications of the 30 modifications made by the minister to the official plan when it was approved, as well as the complexities introduced through the changes resulting from Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act. Bill 23 made significant changes to planning legislation that will redirect zoning staff away from work on the new zoning bylaw. So these changes include as-of-right permissions for up to 3 dwelling units on all residential parcels of land that have municipal water and sewer services. This change to the Act has redirected staff resources from the new zoning bylaw to address immediate amendments that are needed to the current zoning bylaw to recognize permissions for up to 3 units. So the issue is that the current zoning bylaw was not drafted to
and did not contemplate as of right permissions for 3 units. So there are provisions that are unclear now, loops in provisions that should connect, that don't connect, and there are provisions that really have no effect now. And these issues need to be cleared up in the new zoning bylaw. There are also impacts associated with these new development rights, and staff see a need to address those impacts so that as redevelopment occurs according to the permissions in Bill 23, that impacts associated with these increased number of units can be addressed because they're not currently contemplated, in particular for the R1 and R2 zones. This change to the Planning Act has also triggered the need to rework the residential provisions that were prepared to date for the new zoning bylaw. So the second issue that came out of Bill 23 that is causing additional work for staff is a new requirement that the city update current zoning in protected major transit station areas, or PMTSAs, within 1 year of such areas being designated in the official plan. So we had PMTSAs designated in the official plan, and those designations came into effect on November 4th of last year. So we have until November 4th of this year to implement zoning to ensure that the density targets for PMTSAs can be implemented through the zoning bylaw. PMTSAs that do not have adequate zoning for those areas, the zoning bylaw amendment report will be brought to council before November 4th, 2023 to apply zoning that can achieve those density targets. And failure to meet that timeline will result in those amendments no longer being sheltered from appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Bill 23 also implemented limitations on municipal authority to regulate building design through site plan control, and this shifts some of the weight for design-related issues that could be regulated through zoning to the zoning bylaw. These are issues that could have been dealt with through site plan control, and now the zoning team is having to figure out, okay, what are the minimum thresholds for certain design-related issues that we should be considering zoning regulations for to ensure a certain threshold or quality of design for new development. There was another change made through Bill 23 concerning site plan control. So exemption from site plan control for development of 10 or few units. So we can no longer, those types of developments for 10 or less are no longer subject to site plan control. So this, once again, shifts some of the burden of responsibility for functional requirements for the site that could have been dealt with through site plan control back onto the zoning bylaw. And we had discussions earlier today about waste management, and that is a good example of what we start to need to consider with new provisions. So next slide, please. So public engagement in 2023. There will be opportunities for public engagement on the new zoning bylaw this year. We will be kicking off our public engagement events now that we have a new official plan. So discussion papers will be released in Q1 of 2023 on 7 key zoning issues, and they're up on the screen in front of you. 2 of them are relating to neighborhood zoning. So 1 on neighborhood zones, 1 on neighborhood character. There will be a discussion paper on rural zoning, another dealing with equity, diversity, inclusion issues in relation to zoning, which is something that has not been dealt with in an upfront way as it relates to zoning, probably in the history of Ottawa. We have a climate change resiliency and public health paper, which is a very important paper considering we're in a climate change crisis right now. We'll have a paper that deals with trees and infill development and the importance of the urban forest tree canopy. And a land use strategy paper that will summarize new approaches to regulating land use in the city with the objective really of avoiding the types of one of the amendments that we saw today at committee concerning the addition of a veterinary clinic as a permitted use. So we'll be hoping to broaden the range of uses that are permitted in certain zones, obviously in a compatible way, so that we don't have to have applications like that one that we had before you today. So when the discussion papers are released, there will be surveys available for each of the discussion paper, and an as of heard of report will be released in Q3 of this year. And I'll note that the release of the discussion papers was delayed while we were waiting for approval of the official plan, as it was premature to consult with the public on zoning strategies for an official plan that was not yet in full force and effect. Next slide, please. Further, for our public engagement in 2023, we will be releasing a neighborhood form and function report in Q2 of this year. The report will include a summary of various low-rise building forms that have been modeled on a variety of lot sizes in existing neighborhoods and the development standards used to produce such forms. This report is intended to inform discussions on performance standards for residential zones in the new zoning bylaw, and will cover matters such as setbacks, building height, parking, amenity area, landscaping, and trees. The neighborhood form and function report is being produced in consultation with staff who are working on the revisions to the urban design guidelines for low-rise infill housing. The guidelines are intended as a tool to help achieve design-related goals in the official plan concerning infill development in residential areas of the city. And we are working with them so that their approach is going to be consistent with the strategies that we're considering for the new zoning bylaw. And of course, those guidelines will be implementing the intent of the official plan, just as the zoning bylaw will be. Next slide, please. Releasing the first draft in Q1 2024 will allow staff to respond to comments from the public on the discussion papers released in Q1 and to respond to comments on the neighborhood form and function paper report in Q2 23, which will come to this committee and council. Sufficient time to consult with the public is essential to assure transparency of process and to reduce the risk of appeals for new zoning provisions that inadvertently eliminate development rights. So the zoning bylaw is really where the rubber hits the road with the new official plan. It impacts every property in the city. We need time to lead up time to present strategies that the public can hopefully understand and engage with. And that is the beginning stage of our public engagement for this year. The work that we're going to be doing over the next 3 years will require a citywide lot by lot review of properties in the city. The new provisions must also be sensitive to the neighborhood context. This was a commitment made by the city during the new official plan process. Next slide, please. So to sum up, staff are simultaneously working on draft provisions for both the current and new zoning bylaws to respond to the changes to the planning legislation brought in through Bill 23. I'd like to mention that the work plan for the current zoning bylaw, which is the one we have in effect, which was approved on June 25th, 2008, that the timelines for the work to create that zoning bylaw were that bylaw was undertaken on timelines similar to what is proposed in the revised timelines for the new zoning bylaw in the report that you see before you. While zoning bylaw 2008 was an extremely complex project and it was very well done, it was less ambitious in scope than the new zoning bylaw, as it was a harmonization of the zoning bylaws of the former municipalities. So generally speaking, they weren't inventing anything new as part of that bylaw. They were harmonizing the provisions of the former bylaws. The new zoning bylaw will implement an entirely new framework of transects and designations, as well as a revised growth management strategy and entirely new provisions that we haven't seen before, such as for renewable energy generation facilities. It will also involve citywide changes to land use permissions and entirely new zoning provisions, as I mentioned, to address the changing economy and the climate change and housing crises. To successfully achieve these goals and minimize appeals, draft provisions are currently in a detailed stage of development, and a lot by lot consideration of over 300 parcels of land in the city will be required by zoning staff over the next 3 years. So this is a complex and enormous task, and probably the biggest one that our branch has ever undertaken. So Chair, that concludes the presentation, and I'd be pleased to take questions.
Thank you very much. Subject near and dear to my heart and some of the most important work that this committee will oversee over the course of this term of council. There are no delegations today. However, I did want to ask, this report will be presented to the Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee as well.
Yes, Chair, it will on February 24th.
February 24th. So that's an opportunity for those who may be listening who want to make a presentation to go to the ARAC meeting to do so. With that, I see a number of questions. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a few. Can staff help me understand how zoning applications will be handled now in absence of a revised bylaw, but with the new OP passed? How will a zoning application be different today as opposed to if we had a bylaw that has been modified and passed? I'm just trying to understand the difference in how files will be handled.
I'm not sure I understand your question. Like what I can say is right now, zoning bylaw amendments are evaluated on the basis of the official plan and they modify the current zoning bylaw. Once we have a draft bylaw in the public realm, then applicants will probably start referring to being in compliance with both bylaws or needing being in compliance with the new one, but not the current one. And then when we get very close to the time where the new zoning bylaw is about to be approved by council, zoning bylaw amendment reports will start to include a recommendation to modify the draft bylaw to make sure that the proposed development complies with both the new zoning bylaw when it comes into effect and the current zoning bylaw.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is when a municipality has their official plan approved, which we've done, there's a requirement to go through a comprehensive zoning bylaw review, which is what we're doing.
Yes.
And I'm trying to understand, how does that bylaw impact zoning applications? And since we are going to be a number of years between the approval of our OP and the approval of the new modified bylaw, how does that impact or affect applications? Will there be any difference to an application's outcome under the existing bylaw? And would the outcome be different under a modified bylaw? Because there's going to be a gap. So I'm trying to wrap my head. Is there any impact? Is it all aesthetics? Or will it actually impact applications? And the longer we wait to approve a bylaw could impact these. That's what I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Mr. Chair, if I can jump in for a second here, we do have to appreciate that the zoning bylaw is a legal document. It is the law of the land as it sets, and it will continue to be the law of the land until it is repealed and replaced. As such, if any zoning application does come in, they will provide as part of that planning rationale how that application is assessed against the new official plan, the official plan that is now currently in force. So any amendments to the zoning bylaw with respect to any considerations for height, density, things like that would be in keeping with the policies of the new official plan as it goes forward. So the new official plan does have a guidance for new applications as they go through. It is the right of a property owner and a developer to submit an application to redevelop the property and have that considered against the new policies. If an application is coming in as of right, based on the existing zoning bylaw as it is today, they also have the right to continue forward with their application, subject to the regulations of the zoning bylaw as they are today as well.
Okay, my communities are very interested in this comprehensive zoning bylaw review because, as Ms. Reddy said, the review will look at lot by lot. So the micro level analysis within neighborhoods, now that we've passed policy, is how do you implement these changes community by community, street by street? And so what I'm hearing is we will be guided by the policy on a case by case basis. In absence of a lot by lot micro level analysis, we'll try and make our best decisions in the interim of this review. Is that sort of a fair statement?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Can I just ask when we are to receive the planning department's work plan for this term of council? When is that expected to be before us?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if clerks has specifically allocated a date. I believe it is coming at either the end of March or the beginning of April.
Excellent. And finally, in the table that you've provided, you have sort of start dates for certain tasks and end dates. Does end date mean the anticipated date it appears before this committee for approval?
The dates are general for a variety of tasks that are going to be completed in that are listed. Was there a specific one? I guess what I could say is that the last task would be completed by the end date that is shown in the final column.
Fair enough. Okay. Like I said, I get questions about this. The bylaw itself, when I speak at community association meetings, I will be providing them this report and the table just so they can follow as well. But I do anticipate questions about timeline. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockton. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much, Carol and team. Well, you got your hands full. It's very big. I mean, it would have been huge anyway if we were going straight from our new official plan into creating zoning bylaws, but then we have this extra layer that of what the province has put down. And what I'm trying to get my head around is that they've already put in to effect that a property can have 3 units on it, but we are still, if I understand, we're still using our current bylaws and we're not, we don't have time to update them. Is that correct?
So part of the redirection of staff time has been that staff working on the residential zones have had to put their minds to a report, which will be coming to committee in Q2 of this year, to make the necessary changes to the current zoning bylaw to accommodate the Bill 23 permissions. So it's basically just to, remove the current provisions in the current zoning bylaw that are really have no effect anymore, and to try to manage those new permissions that are now as of right.
Okay, so it's kind of an interim.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I think that's important to understand. Apologies, I just want to make sure I get my head around it, and I got to explain it to residents, as Councillor Brockington is saying, and they're so hungry for information. Is it possible to have some kind of primer for them in the interim? Because I think it's important for them to understand what the rules of the game are going to be when we do the new zoning. Can we have some sort of large community for to give them a background of what's coming?
Through the chair, we do have an Engage Ottawa page with information and timelines, but I can see that the director wishes to respond, so please.
Thank you, Chair. There is an orientation session coming forward for the public that will go through the changes that are coming from Bill 109, Bill 23. The fact of the matter is, with respect to Bill 23, that is, of course, a change that's affected all municipalities, and there's still quite a bit of discussion over what the magnitude of these changes might mean as they go by, as different interpretations and legal interpretations come through. So we are all still working on this collectively together to understand what the changes might be. But with respect to some of the interim changes that Carol discussed, some of the changes that we're starting to see is we are seeing some interest in purpose-built buildings that are designed to be looking at 3 units in going forward, in semi-detached, long semis, townhouses, things like that, along with detached. Challenges that we're seeing there is whether or not the parking provisions are responsive to those, whether the waste management provisions are responsive to that, whether the landscaping provisions are contemplating and able to respond to what we're seeing. Rear yard parking, for an example, in many areas of the city, there are no restrictions on the extent of that surfacing. That's something when we have more units that are happening on that lot than what we're originally contemplating in the low-rise scenario, whether or not those are gaps that zoning should be stepping into control on a faster basis, rather than waiting for the more comprehensive proposal to work its way through. So those are some of the interim steps that Carol's team are looking at doing. But as we go along, we are still collecting that information from other municipalities, and we'll be bringing that information forward to the public and to council as we continue to achieve clarity.
Is it possible to have the orientation sessions based on the transect that a community is in, like the inner urban or outer urban? Does that make sense? To give them a little, to make it feel like it's about their area?
Mr. Chair, if I can just get some clarification, is that with respect to Bill 23 implications on a transect
Yes.
basis, or is this?
Yeah.
Transects?
Well, as much also our new official plan, we went and put in transects, and that's the basis of what we're doing going forward, notwithstanding the changes that have come in. But I don't know, just thinking of just one way of breaking it down so that a community can feel that we're looking at their neighborhoods, so they can so the orientation is specific to them, because obviously what we're doing in rural doesn't apply to what we're doing in inner urban or outer urban. It's just a suggestion of how we could break down orientations.
That's a suggestion we'll keep in mind, and we'll consider that. Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I'm sharing some of the same concerns as some of my colleagues about the timelines. I understand it's going to take time to get this all put together, but I thought we would be moving along a lot quicker. And during the election, I warmed a lot of my residents up to the new reality that, and Jeff knows it full out as well, our areas are going to feel this impact probably the greatest with all these changes. So on that, I did notice a couple of things. First of all, neighborhood character was in your slide deck. As we know, up till now, it's almost been laughable. That line has meant absolutely nothing. Is there going to be changes that actually respect the neighborhood character?
Through the chair. So as part of the process of working on the official plan, there was an emphasis on context sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
And the new official plan does, is based on a transect basis with designations that with policies, tailored to each that are transect based. So there will, that is the task of our team. The staff who are doing the neighborhood zones are responsible for certain areas of the city, and they've been told to become very familiar with those areas, to visit them, to see the types of facilities that are there, to understand the character of the neighborhood. And as far as that discussion paper goes, it really does, the whole point of the discussion paper is to talk about what neighborhood character means, and to, from a zoning perspective, identify those particular issues that we can deal with under the Planning Act, under Section 34, which is what gives municipalities the ability to zone. There are certain things that we can deal with that people may think of as character, but there are other things that we can't. And that's what the paper talks about, just to try and bring some clarity to that issue.
That's terrific. And I'll be paying close attention to that. Something that's become a little more timely in my neighborhood, and I just want to see how this could get onto the radar. It's related to severance and corner lot provisions. I'm dealing with this. I've had 2 in a row where, they're dividing properties, putting laneways onto additional roads. Is this something that will be examined as well, corner lot provision?
Through the chair, yes, it will be.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tierney. Councillor Gower.
Thanks, Chair. So once this is in place, the new bylaw, it's going to streamline the planning process, which will mean less cost and complexity for builders, which should mean lower cost to build and building faster. So it's in everyone's interest to complete this as quickly as possible. Have you explored, is there any opportunity for outsourcing some of this work, bringing in consultants to take pieces of it? What is the plan, or what have you looked into there?
Through the chair. So we've brought to the development of the zoning bylaw to a stage now where I can evaluate which work packages should be sent out to consultants to speed up the work, to free up staff time to focus on the very sensitive work packages, such as the neighborhood zones. which I feel are best dealt with in-house by in-house staff. So yes, we are at that stage, and I will be sending out requests for proposals soon for certain packages of zoning work.
Well, because we're about to go through a budget process. If you had additional funds from council, would that be helpful at this point? Would it meaningfully bring up the deadline so it's completed sooner?
Our budget through the chair is funded through a capital account through DC fees. As of April of 2024, we will no longer be able to collect fees for that purpose as a result of changes in Bill 23. So yes, I can absolutely confirm we will need funding for the project after that point. And I would like to explore, yes, for sure, I would like to explore additional funds for consulting.
And has the province indicated at all that they might have any special pool of funding for municipalities going through this kind of major zoning update to reflect the changes that they've introduced over the last year and a half or so?
My understanding through the chair is that municipalities will be made whole, to use that language. I haven't seen anything in particular in relation to municipalities having, in this regard, in terms of having to hire consultants to complete work over because of timelines. And so I'm not particularly aware of a specific fund available at this time, but that is something that I could look into and answer questions. Perhaps someone.
Chair, just to clarify with respect to that, there is a municipal streamlining fund that has been made available. The city has applied for that, and we have received a portion of funding from that to assist us with the development of the form and function strategy that will be coming forth with. So we have applied for that. We were successful. We do have funding sources coming from that. With respect to the funding that Carol mentioned from Minister Clark's letter, that is with respect to development charges writ large. So that's something that we will be looking at closely as we find out more details from the province about what that might mean.
Okay. You touched on something in your presentation, Carol, that I thought was really important, public consultation, and you said it would lead to less appeals. I wonder if you could just give us a little more context around that and what that means and why consultation is so important in the process here.
Through the chair, thank you. I'd enjoy speaking about this. So part of the success of bylaw 2008-250, the current bylaw that we have, was that it was undertaken over the course of at least 3 or 4, actually 5 years, and that there were several drafts of the bylaw released at approximately 1-year intervals. And as a part of the public consultations that occurred following the release of each of those drafts, staff undertook to respond to comments from individual property owners about specific parcels of land. And they were able to modify the zoning for a variety of reasons to satisfy the property owners. And of course, it was always within the bounds of what the official plan was directing. It was to correct errors that had been made by staff because there are 300,000 parcels. And it is very easy. We'd have to never make a mistake, and that's just not possible. And as a result of these multiple amendments that are made over time, like it's just like picking up grains of sand, staff over the course of 3 years, staff were able to bring a bylaw forward that only had 60 appeals. And when you have 60 appeals and there are 300,000 parcels, that's an amazing success. And, that is, if we are not given adequate time to undertake this work, the work that I've described, the process that was undertaken in the past for the current bylaw, we will not bring a bylaw forward that will, pass through that test as well. We could wind up with hundreds of appeals. And that is something that defeats a bylaw. It could wind up needing to be repealed. I don't want to go there. This is very fastidious work. It requires hours and hours and hours and hours of staff time to be responsive to the concerns of property owners, and rightfully so, because we're affecting their development rights. So I want the time to be able to undertake that work and to get that, to avoid these appeals that can happen. And of course, appeals ultimately are unavoidable, and they will come, and we'll have to deal with them. But we can do the necessary work to avoid appeals that are basically unnecessary. And I will say that of those 60 appeals, we only went to I think there were 10 hearings. We managed to settle most of those appeals without extensive board hearings, which is or at that time it was the board, which is a very efficient use of staff time.
Okay. Yeah, I know you're under a lot of pressure from counselors and from the development industry as well to move as quickly as possible, but that's a good reminder that it does take time to get things right. So, if there is more that you need, more support, funding wise or otherwise from committee or council, please do ask, because this is a really important priority for council in this term. The last thing I wanted to ask is what's the status of the sponsors group? I imagine there's some people who were on it in the last term who are no longer counselors, and what's the plan for recruiting new members?
Chair, I believe that is with the clerk's office. My understanding is that that is something that is going to come forward with respect to the allocation of sponsors groups in Q2. But that's something that the clerk's office is administering.
Okay, super. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gower. And certainly I would encourage folks who, even if you're not on the sponsors group, reach out to David and Carol and start talking to staff about the official plan update or the comprehensive zoning bylaw update. It is important, partly in response to what Councillor Brockington said, with respect to what happens when you have a bylaw, a zoning bylaw that doesn't match the official plan. Well, we've been living with that for years. Right. We see multiple applications coming in front of this committee for rezonings, when simply looking at them, we know that those clearly fulfill the intent of even the last official plan with respect to the thrust toward intensification, the thrust toward development near transit. Our new official plan takes that further, but our zoning bylaw hasn't kept up for many years now. So it's not all that unfamiliar ground right now. The sooner we can get the comprehensive zoning bylaw update reviewed and passed, hopefully that will cut down on the number of applications that are coming before this committee. So with that, I am going to ask if that recommendation is received.
Received.
I'm not going to call for it right now. Is it carried? Okay, it's carried.
Carried.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Carol. We're obviously all very interested in that. I don't believe that we have any in-camera items to speak to today. Are there any notices of motion? None have been filed beforehand for consideration. Are there any inquiries? We haven't received any to date. No other business. Are we adjourned? Thank you very much, committee.